Welcome to this demonstration of Infowise Ultimate Forms. In this demonstration, we'll cover some of the major features that the product has. It should give you a good understanding of what the product is and what it does. So in general, Ultimate Forms is a platform that runs on top of SharePoint that allows you to build business solutions, business process, business applications within the browser without having to use any special tools, SharePoint workflows, or so on. In terms of functionality, Ultimate Forms provides additional functionality in three main areas. The first area is the actual forms. Infowise extends the regular SharePoint forms to the point where they can serve as the front end to a business solution. The second area is everything that has to do with business logic, background processes, automation, everything that happens behind the scenes and makes the system work. And the third area is enhanced reporting and visualization. In terms of forms, let's start with something really simple. Pretty much the first thing that people ask for when they start working with SharePoint, when they go to a list such as this contact list right here, they create a new item and they see a form that looks something like this. And the first thing that they want is a form that looks nicer, that's easier to work with and easier on the eye. I've got a similar list right here named leads. But if I open an item here, I get a form that looks different from what we just saw. The whole layout of the form is different. Here we have this tab interface, so the form is subdivided into different tabs and fields are grouped by topic. You can also set colors and fonts either by using one of our theme templates or choosing your own custom colors. And the same design is preserved across the different forms. This is the display form and this is the edit form. And you can see that the same design is carried over here as well. Once you install it, and it doesn't matter if you're using SharePoint on-premise or in the cloud, you'll get this new button called Design on your List or Library tab in your ribbon. When you click on the button, you get to the home page of Ultimate Forms. And by the way, you can also get here directly from the SharePoint site contents. On the Ultimate Forms homepage, on the right-hand side, you get some quick start instructions. You also get links to all the tutorials that we have. We have a lot of training and tutorial information on the website, and you can access it from here. On the left, you get access to the actual features of Ultimate Forms. Features are grouped by category. The feature that we're going to use for this particular form is called Tabs and Permissions, so let's click that. Once again, we have tutorials, but in this case, they're specific to where we are within the product. It's more contextual. There's pretty extensive documentation, and we're building it out constantly. So if you get stuck, there's a good chance you'll be able to find something to help you out. On the left is the actual design form. Now this one's already set up, but let me explain briefly what you're looking at. You remember we had 3 tabs on the form? Well, here they are. You can add as many tabs as you need. When you have tabs created, you associate columns from the list with the tabs you want it to appear on. This tab has these columns. If I switch to a different tab, you can see other columns associated with it. You can also add blank rows or section headers and even additional text or images using what we call fragments. Now, this can be handy if you want to add form instructions, for example. I'm going to skip permissions for now and move directly to the general settings. You can do things like set up stacked groups. You can change the title of the form. There are some built-in themes that will give your form a nicer look, or you can control label and description placement or column layout. In the Styles section, you get to control things like background color, borders, and so on. So Ultimate Forms gives you a nicer look than stock SharePoint forms, but the main focus of the product is really functionality. Let's create a new item in this list. It's a new lead. So we'll put in last name and first name, and you see the full name fills in automatically. This is set up with the dynamic rule. Using dynamic rules, you can automate fields based on other field information. You can do values based on calculations or function, and so on. Now this allows people to fill in forms faster and with fewer errors, which is a good thing. This is a very simple glimpse at the kind of functionality that you can get from Ultimate Forms. Now, let's take a look at a more real-life application. I've got a purchase order list here. Now, purchase orders are something that you can't really do with out-of-the-box SharePoint because you need multiple line items within records, and that's not a feature of SharePoint. But it's very easy to do in Ultimate Forms. Let me open up this PO for an example. Now, you can see inside the order list item, I've got line items. The way we do this is with creating a relationship between two lists. We've got a primary list called purchase orders and a secondary list called order lines. Each line item is native within the secondary list. If I open the line item, I see all the info displayed from that list and can edit it directly from here. This is a normal list. It has its own metadata, its own workflows, its own permissions. You've got a price, which is a regular SharePoint currency field, and we have a regular SharePoint calculated field for a total. On the PO parent, though, we have this field here that's an associated item summary, which is an Ultimate Forms column type, and that automatically creates a subtotal or a total of all the child items that belong to the parents. This number here is calculated automatically, and it's also automatically maintained. So any changes to those child items automatically get propagated to the total in real time. We're using tabs here, but we're not just using them to separate content. We're actually using them for permission and workflow controls. For example, the Approval tab is only editable for certain people and under certain conditions. If I go now and try and edit this item after it's been approved, the whole item's locked down. This is all read-only. The Approval tab is also read-only because we don't want to make any changes at this point. What about creating a new PO? When I click on New here, you'll see a new form. Now the difference here is that now we see the first tab is open for editing, but we can't even see the second tab, the Approval tab, because we don't need it at this point. What else do we have here? Well, we have a couple of lookup columns. We have this supply lookup column. It goes into the suppliers list, and we have this contact lookup column that goes into the contact list. If I change my supplier here, the list of possible contact people gets filtered accordingly. So we have this cascading relationship. Now, if the supplier is not found, we can add it directly from here. The same goes for the contact person, but that opens up a pop-up dialog. And the reason for this is because if we add a new contact, we want to add some additional information, such as a phone number and an email to the linked table record. Let's put something for a phone number and something for an email and try and save that. Oop, didn't work. And that's because we're using pattern-based validation rules here. This doesn't look like a phone number, and this doesn't look like an email. We can use validation rules that are built on patterns, either pre-built ones, or you can set up custom patterns based on regular expressions. You can also use comparisons of one field to another, for example, to make sure a due date is greater than a start date. You can even do conditional validation, only run the validation rules if certain predefined conditions apply. Let me put in something here that looks like a regular phone number and try saving. Okay, you can see it now accepts the value. It still doesn't accept the email one. Well, we're good with that. Now let's add some line items. I'll start by clicking New Item. In this particular demo, I'm actually storing all of my products and price list in an external Azure database. Ultimate Forms can interact with external data. I'm selecting a category here, and the tool will go through the database and bring back the names of the product that belong to this category. So let's get some DVDs, and get like 5 of those, so you can see that it goes into the list as lines like I already mentioned. Now, the actual purchase order is not even saved at this point. I've got to click Save here. That creates a new item in that secondary list. It now shows up here, and it's also starting to calculate my subtotal. Let me add another item so we can see that more clearly. I'll just add some TVs as well. Now, you can see that it's calculating the total here and the total fee. And if I enter tax, it'll calculate automatically. We're also using dynamic rules for that. Okay, let's cancel out of this order. Now, we know we can create a new purchase order and we know how to approve it. So the next step would be send a purchase order to our supplier, right? Let's use the Ultimate Forms print feature for that. I'm right-clicking on the item and I'll select Print from the pop-up menu. This displays the PO in a print preview. Now this is based on a customizable template, so you can have your own header, you can have your own footer. Here are the line items, the signature is here. We can even turn one of the fields into a barcode and then we can print it, or we can convert it to a PDF, or we can even email it directly from here, for example, as a PDF attachment. Now, if I try and do the same thing with this item that's not approved to print, well, we'll see this message. The idea here is that we can actually have multiple templates. We can allow our users to select one, we can select one for them, or as in this case, we can force one on them based on the properties of the item. Now let's focus on the tab permissions. Basically, this is what makes the form change its behavior based on who's doing what. We have two tabs here, Main Details and Approvals. Let's take a look at the permissions on the Main Details first. Now this setup is very, very simple. We've got this tab set as writable on a new form and it's read only on all the other forms. We don't want any changes. The Approval tab is slightly more complicated. It's hidden on the new form. It's read only on all the other forms unless you're one of the demo owners, which is a SharePoint group, and the approval is not given. Then it's writable, which is exactly what we saw earlier. This is pretty easy to set up, just a few rules. The rule can control things like if the tab is read only or visible or not visible. Rules can belong to a certain group or to other people. A rule can be attached to a certain form, and the rule can also have conditions. Now let's take it up a notch. I want to show you something we call dynamic rules. We've got this list here, insurance. In this list, we manage vehicle and house insurance. When I create a new item, I only see a single tab, Main Details. The first field is type of insurance. And if I select house here, I immediately see another tab with house details. If I change that to vehicle, then I get vehicle details. The form is dynamically changing itself according to what the user is doing, and this is very, very easy to set up. You can control tabs and even individual fields, so you can have a fully dynamic form. And the beauty of this is that you can do it without having to be a JavaScript expert at all. There's no script involved, no coding. It's all rule-based. Let's take a look at the tab settings for this list to see how easy it is. You can see that we have three tabs here, Main Details, House Details, and Vehicle Details. The Main Details tab doesn't have any permissions, so we'll ignore that. If we go to House Details, we have a couple of permission rules here. It's hidden when the insurance type is not equal to house and writable when it is. The same goes for vehicle. All I have to do to make the rule dynamic is to select this option, Apply Permissions Dynamically. That's it. That's all you have to do. Ultimate Forms takes care of all the plumbing. It watches for changes in the insurance type field and applies permissions accordingly in real time. Now, the last thing I want to show you in Forms. Let's look at an example of an expense report form. What's so special about this? Well, a couple of things. First is the design of the form itself. There are basically endless possibilities in terms of what you want your form to look like. This is just the design we found on the internet that we liked, so we applied it here. The employee name field, this can pick any property from your or someone else's user profile, like name, email, address, phone number, manager's name, and so on, and it pre-fills it into the form. Very convenient. The items here are similar to the ones that we had in the purchase order, but in this case, we allow them to be entered directly through the details grid. And again, we're using tabs for approval. Okay, we're done with forms. Let's talk now about business logic. When we talk about business logic in SharePoint, we're usually talking about workflows. You can use SharePoint workflows if you want, but from our experience, in many cases, they're not a good solution. Out of the box, they're very limited and they're very hard to set up. To get any major functionality out of them, you more or less need to be an expert, and it takes time. So in many cases, people just don't bother to have any business logic whatsoever instead of having to mess around with workflows. And that's why we have a component in Ultimate Forms that's called Actions. Actions allow us to implement sophisticated business logic without having to use SharePoint workflows. Let me show you an example. This is a list of projects. Once I create a project in this list, there are background actions that run and set up that project for me. There are 4 things that are going to happen. First of all, we're going to create a couple of tasks in a separate but linked task list. One is going to be called Generate Documentation, and the other one's going to be called Assign Resources. Then we're going to set up a team site for the project. And at the end, we're going to link the team site through the project item itself through this hyperlink field. So let's do that. So my new project is going to be Project 169, and I'm just going to provide some basic information, start and end date, and then click Save. When you click Save, the background actions start running, and some of them are already complete. We've got the task column here, which has a relationship with the project task list. If we click on it, it'll display all the tasks associated with the project, and you can see the 2 we wanted are already there. You can click into a task and edit it independently. It's just a regular SharePoint list item. Okay, we should be done with all the actions by now. So look, here's the link to our brand new team site. You can click on it. It'll take you directly to the team site. Same name. Let's take a look at how we set this up. We'll go back into Ultimate Forms and open up the Business Logic area and go to Actions. First, let's talk about what's available. There are 15 types of actions that we can choose from. Those actions can do things within SharePoint and outside of SharePoint. For example, we can update any number of list items in any list in any site collection. And we can create new list items, and we can delete, we can copy, we can send emails, we can run workflows, we can create new lists, we can create new sites, we can manage permissions on anything from a single item up to a whole site, and we can run stored procedures on external databases and pass values from our items into that stored procedure as parameters. We can do this with web services and REST APIs. We can manage Active Directory, meaning that we can create new users, new groups, and so on. We can automate the print functionality that we saw earlier. We can also calculate summaries, and we can generate associated tasks. Actions can run on various events. For example, when a list item is created or when it's updated. They can also run on a timer. For example, 2 days before the due date of the task, or even on an hourly, daily, weekly, and monthly basis. They can even be run manually through a button on the ribbon. We can also put in conditions that will specify exactly when you do or don't want the action to run. For example, only run this action when the status changes to complete. Let's take a look at one of these actions here. This action is called Generate Documentation. It's set up to create a new list item when it runs. Let's click Edit and look at the action settings. We're pointed to a list, in this case, the project tasks, and then we map the column values that we want to assign to that newly created item. So the task name will be Generate Documentation for and the title of the project. When you see something like this here that's surrounded by square brackets, it's a field value from the current item, which is project. Start date is the same as the start of the project. Due date is start of the project plus 2 days. You can do some arithmetic operations and calculations here. And to help you define what values to assign, we have this value picker right here. Now here you can type in something, you can select from our columns of the current items, and you can also use our functions. We have a wide selection of functions that can basically manipulate your values to create something new. Here's an example. This year function, it takes a year from a date. If I give it the value from the created date column, it will return 2018. If I do this, it'll return 2019. When I click OK, it'll make sure that whatever I entered here is valid in terms of syntax, like I didn't forget any brackets. It also checks in terms of the data type of the column that I'm trying to assign it to. In this case, I'm trying to assign to a column called %complete, which is a numeric column, so this value will work great. But if I assign something else, for example, created by, which is a text field, and I try to save it, it'll tell me that we're expecting a number. So we have the 4 actions here that created a couple of tasks, a team site, and a link. We also have one additional action, which is a manual action called Complete Project. It changes the status of the project to be completed. How do we run that? Back on the list, we can select one or more items right here, and then from the ribbon, click on Run Actions. It'll show us all of our manual actions. We can have multiple manual actions, but all we have to do is click on it, and it'll do whatever it's supposed to do in the background. We really don't need to know. And then we close that, and it refreshes, and you can see now that the task is completed, and it's also green. The color coding is also part of Ultimate Forms, by the way. It's very easy to set up, but I'm not going to get into that today. Okay, so as you can see, actions are a great way to use business logic in a way that's a lot quicker than building and deploying a workflow, and it gets the job done. But business logic is not just actions. We also have the ability to replace the stock SharePoint alerts with something that is a lot more configurable. Let's take a look. With our alert mechanism, you have several advantages over the built-in SharePoint alerts. First of all, SharePoint alerts can be sent only to other SharePoint users within your organization. With Ultimate Forms, you can send to SharePoint user groups or Active Directory security groups. You can even send to users listed in a column, so you can dynamically determine the recipient based on a column value. For example, if it's a manager column, it would go to a different manager for each item. And you can also send to external recipients. You can actually type in any type of email address right here. It will be sent there as well. We can send based on events. You can select when item is added or modified. You can also send according to a date column. For example, I want to send a notification out 2 days before the end date of the project, and then I want to repeat that notification every day up to 10 times. Now, in the meantime, the project has been completed, and I don't want to continue notifying them about that, so I'm just going to add a condition saying that the status should not be completed, and that's it. And you control how the actual email looks. You can create your own email templates that look nothing like SharePoint alerts. They can look like regular emails. For example, you can say hi and then add the modified field right here in the subject line, and that'll dynamically replace the value in the outgoing email. Next, let's talk about import. Import allows us to create an automated process that will go into some sort of a data source, look for new or updated data there, and bring it into SharePoint. An example of that would be a mailbox. You can listen to the emails that come into a certain box and create new items out of those emails. A common scenario would be a help desk solution, but it's not limited to only email. You can also import from databases, web services, flat files, and so on. And it's an automated process. You set up a schedule and it just goes behind the scenes and does whatever it's supposed to do. You can not only create new items, but you can update existing items. This way, you can easily set up something like an email-based approval or something like that, and you can put in conditions and so on. The last thing I want to show you under the business logic heading, we actually saw this earlier in passing. It's these custom item IDs. you can create custom IDs that are automatically generated based on a predefined template. Okay, so we're done with business logic. The last thing I want to talk about, which is the shortest and easiest, is reporting and visualization. Built-in SharePoint visualization is pretty limited, but Ultimate Forms gives you a lot of extra possibilities. For instance, the calendar allows us to combine information from different sources like SharePoint and Exchange databases into one color-coded calendar. You can also see different views for this. Charts allow us to display information from SharePoint lists. There are 35 different types of charts that you can use, which allows you to build your own dashboards without messing around with Power BI or exporting data to Tableau, for instance. Under indicators, you can do things like create progress bars, 3-state KPIs, or countdown timers. The last thing that I'm going to demonstrate today is how easy it is to set up something like this progress bar right here called utilization. This compares the actual amount with the budget amount. So we'll go back into Ultimate Forms and scroll all the way down to Configure Columns and then click on Indicator. Here I can create a new indicator or edit an existing one. Let's click to edit utilization. The type of the column is progress bar. It takes the value from the actual field in the list and it displays it within the range of 0 to budget. Now, by default, the progress bar is all green. So I added an optional color rule that says when it's over 80%, it turns red. That's all. It takes exactly 10 seconds to do this. Actually, the whole demo site that we're seeing here with all the features that I showed you took about a half a day to develop. Obviously, it's quicker for someone who knows what he's doing, but it really is very fast and easy to do. Also, we have a template manager feature built into the product that supports the ability to build your site once and then replicate all your settings in a new site with just the click of a button. That's it. That's the demo. So, next steps. I encourage you to download the 30-day free trial if you haven't already done so. You can get it directly from the site, and there are instructions for how to get started. And as I said before, there's a lot of tutorial and training material on the site. If you purchase a license, unlimited support is included. There is a 2-hour Kickstart training that is also included with the license. And then there's more in-depth training available. Thank you for watching.